Pennsylvania Chesapeake Bay program, and is founder and president of her organization's Criminal and Justice Reform Network, First Alliance Consulting LLC, and the Coalition for Families Against Child Separation. Previously, she served as the Director of Legal Empowerment and the Dean of Instruction for the Justice and Liberation Institute with Life After Release in PG County, Maryland. Please welcome Bakura Shabazz.
Thank you all. It's such an honor to be here again and be in community with such awesome folks doing the very hard work of environmental justice work, combating environmental injustice. As our Honorable Janet Phoenix said, I am Bakura Shabazz, and I became interested in the work shortly after I was kind of thrown over on this side. As she stated, I was very involved with criminal and justice work, and I was very unfamiliar with environmental issues, even though my family was extremely impacted. I didn't even realize it until I was hired on into the conservation sector with the Virginia Conservation Network. And it was at that time when I was forced to learn as much as I could about environmental issues, and it just dawned on me how my community was being affected, how my family was directly impacted by environmental issues in my home city of Newport News. I have 4 children, all who have upper respiratory diseases, and I did not know that could have been an indirect correlation to living between 2 interstates, a coal depot, automobile plant, shipyards, and other industry. And at that time, I decided to get extremely involved in environmental work to make sure that my communities have the information that they need to be empowered, to be able to advocate for themselves, and to know how to engage with their elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to go to Leslie King. Leslie King is an esteemed consultant and futurist who is a significant force in advancing organizational and community change. With over 15 years of professional expertise, she's demonstrated a commitment to equity-driven change, assisting leaders, students, communities, and organizations in their transformative journey. Her vast professional background encompasses training, facilitation, leadership development, coaching, shared knowledge creation, and future-oriented design. These include health equity, climate and environmental justice, revision of historical narratives, Black infant mortality, culturally responsive education, and police community relations. She's worked with a number of distinguished organizations, including Sierra Club, Beyond Coal, and Ready for 100 campaigns, Healing Our Waters, the Peninsula Center for Conflict Resolution, and the Nellie Mae Foundation. Rooted in the conviction that a just and equitable social ecosystem is paramount, she champions change that seeks to enhance everyone's economic, social, and physical well-being. Please welcome Leslie King.
Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I guess I'll start off with how I got involved in environmental justice work as well. I do live here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I like to call it the Burg. And some of you will get that as opposed to Lynchburg. But part of the work that I've done initially, as a consultant, I work with the Sierra Club on their clean and renewable energy campaign, developing dialogic processes to engage communities in the conversation. And in that process, this was a few years ago, I recognized that the language was very academic and not everyone could enter into that conversation. And so creating a space, number one, where everyday people can engage and learn about clean and renewable energy, but also inverting the power dynamics and empowering communities so that they have power to make change within their own communities. And so I kind of see my work as a part of that. So it's through that particular process that my interest with environment and climate issues developed, and recognizing in my own community the environmental injustice and climate issues that exist, and then expanding into climate resilience work and engaging communities. And for example, in Lynchburg, like many other communities, we have closed landfills that are in predominantly Black neighborhoods or historically Black neighborhoods. We have, high rates of asthma and things of that nature. But primarily, I see my work as building power so that communities can tap into their own sense of agency to address these issues around climate and environmental justice. And so I do that in communities, and then I also do that with organizations, so national organizations. And so I'm so thankful that I've had the opportunity over the last couple of years to do work locally, because a lot of my work has been with national campaigns and helping organizations strategize and develop strategies around environment and climate justice. So primarily that's been my work. I see that the work that I do is empowering people, everyday people, so that they can create change themselves rather than institutions with all of the power and all of the resources coming in and telling communities what they should and shouldn't be doing. That the communities, that relationship is changed, and so that the communities are the ones that are leading the process and that are creating more equitable outcomes for everyone.
Thank you, Leslie. Next, we'll go to Michelle Williams. Michelle was on the path to enlisting in the U.S. Army when she experienced another calling, and changed paths to become a lead teacher and TA, providing educational services, especially for special education underserved children. For the past 8 years, she has been pouring her time into educating and advocating to protect the civil rights for parents of special needs children and adults, holding positions that have highlighted legislative needs before the General Assembly, and ensuring that the rights of both students and parents are protected under their individualized education plans. For the last 4 years, Michelle has worked with Ms. Shabazz in the areas of environmental justice, mental health, and concerns that plague many individuals, sharing personal journeys and continuing to learn how disparities that people face and the common needs that they have inform and can liberate all individuals, especially those impacted. She currently holds positions as an administrative advocate for Justice EJ in education alongside Ms. Shabazz, and has collaborated to provide support to families of individuals who face incarceration. Please welcome Michelle Williams.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Um, I would like to say thank you for the opportunity to present on amongst this panel. Um, I've learned along the way that it is very important to be still, to be able to know which direction one is going to take. Never did I ever live or was brought up to think that nothing could ever happen to me. However, to have a plan of action in case. So, upon me transitioning from going into the military to working with children, I noticed that there was a strong will for individuals who were in position to help students. They would take a mindset of having low expectations for these students. So, me being me, let's gather everyone up and we're going to learn together. As far as my personal journeys, I've learned to become humble, to ask questions, to not feel afraid that I don't belong in a certain space, to surround myself with individuals, particularly today, Ms. Shabazz, and advocates who are most empowering individuals who will take the time to explain and express the needs of communities impacted. When you say environmental, you do, like Ms. Shabazz says, you never really think about that part of how the environment itself impacts our students in learning. Um, Me being in positions to have to deal with the educational needs of my own students allowed me to be in spaces with incoming parents who didn't know. So my goal was to inform and empower them so that they could understand that it is the rights belong to them and their children and to protect those rights.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, Randy Welch. We want to welcome Randy Welch to our panel. Randy is here representing the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, which is an organization that is full of selfless individuals hoping to make our communities healthier, stronger, and better places for all. Randy is the technical assistance provider for North Carolina. As the TAP, he assists communities with waste and wastewater operations, financial management, and provides education in order for the community to become financially self-sustaining. The rural communities throughout SERCAP struggle with the expertise and resources to provide the high quality of infrastructure and quality of living. Lack of water and wastewater resources is a direct result of other larger problems like poverty and environmental justice. The ability to help communities through the problems they are facing is very rewarding for Randy, and we want to welcome him to the panel. Randy?
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Phoenix. And first, I want to say it's an honor to be a part of this distinguished panel today and the group of individuals that we have here with their expertise that we can share amongst the listeners today. The work that we do and provide on the ground, as I call it, boots on the ground, is we go out to these communities that we know are struggling. And a lot of the communities that we work with are communities of color that are left behind in a lot of the health issues that goes on in the community. A lot of what we see circles around to water and wastewater needs. A community and an individual cannot grow without adequate water and wastewater in their community and for their own self individuals. So, a lot of the work that we do circles around that we help build a community and build them back up. Because even though they may be rural, they're still a community. And we want to see that community thrive and be a part of the future that will lead to more services provided for them. It could be healthcare, it could be education, the list goes on and on. So I appreciate the opportunity again of being on and look forward to having some great discussions today.
Thank you. And I realized that I forgot to introduce myself. I am a fill-in moderator. Pamela Bingham is ill today and couldn't moderate this panel. So I am going to be moderating today, and I'm Janet Phoenix. I am one of the co-chairs of the Virginia Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. I'm also a member of the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, and very, very pleased to be here today. And looking forward to kind of hearing the rich discussion that I think will follow from all of the panelists who are here. And unfortunately, it looks like we lost Michelle, but hopefully we'll get her back soon. The first question I have is for you, Ms. Shabazz. The Commonwealth of Virginia is a diverse state geographically. And so, depending upon where you live, you may be facing different EJ issues, particularly those that impact people of color in the state. And we've had a lot of changes in the leadership at the Department of Environmental Quality. Can you talk about kind of what impact that may have had on our ability to address EJ in the state and other issues that you think are critical that have been at the center of the work that you've been doing?
Yes, and thank you so much for that. There are several environmental injustice issues that plague people of color in Virginia, but I want to first define EJ in the context of my work and what it is that my organization does. Environmental justice encompasses any and all injustice that may happen in one's environment and the potential of an injustice happening in one's environment. And when we talk about environment, it's not just nature; it's everything that is in one's life, whether it's childcare or housing. All of those things deal with the environment. I like to akin environmental work to a bicycle wheel. The center of that bicycle wheel is environmental work, and all the spokes that come out of it is everything else: housing, criminal justice, all of those things. And so because everything is connected to the environment, everything should be included in environmental work. And that is the scope from where we work from. And we believe that environmental justice is the solution to environmental injustice. I also want to take a second to define the EPA's definition of environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And that is, just really, really important when we talk about, inclusion of all people. And it is evident the EJ issues that are plaguing communities of color: poor air quality, water contamination, hazardous waste sites, climate change, lack of access to green spaces, healthy foods, mental health treatment, and other adequate medical and legal services. Another component that harms us is being historically, up until right now, continuously excluded from environmental decision-making processes. Our lack of representation in these spaces normally will result in policies and practices that disproportionately harm and fail to address our personal environmental concerns and needs in our communities. Some EJ priorities in Virginia are addressing the things that I just previously mentioned, such as reducing poor air quality, which is, in my introduction, I talked about a little bit in Newport News and Richmond spaces, cities in Virginia. Some days you can cut the air with a knife, it looks like. You can look back I'm 44 now, but there was a community called Dickinson Court that was right beside, and I mean right beside, a coal depot. And the soot is inside of people's houses where they can take their finger and it's completely, filled with coal. And so eliminating that type of air pollution and hazards and directly in our home, ensuring that people have clean water, mitigating climate change impacts, equitable access to green spaces, and prioritizing environmental health and justice through education and awareness, which is my major role as the community engagement liaison for the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative and as the president of the Environmental Justice Academy Alumni Association. You spoke about the former DEQ EJ director, Renee Hoyos, who worked very closely with us in the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative. And I would say we were skeptical because she came all the way from Tennessee, but Ms. Hoyos was a beautiful person and really believed in the collaborative's vision of focusing on EJ in the state and doing right by the citizens in the state. And she definitely, I would say, tried her best to fill in that gap and represent, Virginians. Unfortunately, there are some people that don't believe that climate change is real, uh, doesn't believe in sea level rise when we see the seas rise, and it's like it's right there in front of your face. I don't, and I don't understand the mentality of denying what is happening right in front of us that we see. Um, but it is having a huge, impact in terms of, policy, that our organizations. Virginia has some wonderful organizations that are pushing strong environmental justice policies. And if we have a political climate that doesn't believe in those things, then it's going to harm all of us, even those that don't believe in it. And so our organizations in the state, have been pushing back on these environmental rollbacks that our current administration is pushing. And we are really fighting vigorously to save, the our prior work that we have done legislatively, um, to make sure that people are safe. It is our hopes that Virginia can keep the environmental justice a focus through the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, which is the state's only EJ Center organization, that is very intentional about EJ work and EJ oversight in the state. Um, it the collaborative is extremely important in the fact that it is not a governmental organization, and we are able to say the things that need to be said, and assist in a way that empowers communities to be able to push back on corporate polluters and legislators that are causing harm in their communities. And so we're going to continue to keep hope alive in Virginia, and move forward with our fight to make sure that everybody is safe and can thrive here.
Thank you. The next question is for Leslie King. Leslie, both you and Resilient Virginia and the Lynchburg community completed an innovative EJ Small Grant. Can you tell us how you developed a climate equity plan and what the goals of Lynchburg Rising were and are with regard to climate equity and the intersection of environmental justice?
Sure. So that particular project was a collaborative, as you said, with Resilient Virginia and other community partners and community leaders, in engaging parts of the community, especially those that have been historically marginalized and most vulnerable to environmental injustice impacts. And in that particular grant, part of the goal was to engage communities around particular hazards. We looked at flood islands, so increased flooding, heat island, and we looked at hazardous um, material in particular neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods were identified looking at indicators of vulnerability, and the neighborhoods were also in places where historically redlining had taken place. So while this grant did not allow for actually developing the climate equity plan, it was an opportunity to hear from and engage community members and find out what in particular is happening in their neighborhoods as it relates to flooding and increased heat, hazardous material, and any other EJ or climate issue that may arise in that particular process. And so the approach there was recognizing that when we are engaging communities, we're not just looking at for harms, that these communities have strength, they have knowledge, agency, and ability to do, right? And so tapping into that strength in that particular process, but also engaging neighborhood leaders and people who just live in the neighborhood in conversations around environmental justice, which they may not have engaged in collectively, right? And so in that particular process, as we did that, there is the building of community and identifying that we have similar issues in our neighborhood, and other issues came up in that process. So we recognize as we were engaging communities, we also were able to develop neighborhood ambassadors or leaders who could also bring people together and talk about these issues as well, so that we're building capacity as we continue to do work in the community around environmental justice. And so what we found is a number of neighborhoods had increased flooding because of debris. For whatever reason, maybe the city did not address that there were increased heat, because trees had been taken down in certain neighborhoods. And we also discovered that, some of the neighbors or people in the community were not aware that there were hazardous materials that had been there. So it was really an opportunity to kind of engage and determine where the issues are in order to continue to do that work in the neighborhoods. And so there's still work that is going on even in the absence of the grant. So we did the data collection. We engaged 3 neighborhoods, and we also did some educational work around heat, increased heat, flooding, and also hazardous material. And we provided an opportunity and a space to think through how can not only institutions respond to these issues, but how can individuals, what can individuals do when, because we've had increased rain and flooding this summer, right? And so how can they respond to that on an individual level, but then also how can the local government also respond to those types of issues? So primarily that's what Lynchburg Rising is about. It's about, again, building power for those in the community. And one thing I like to say is when you bring people together and they have not had a conversation, you have different ideas about what, individuals have ideas about what they want, but collectively it takes time to identify what a particular neighborhood wants. And sometimes what happens is institutions with the power and resources come in and co-opt that process, right? For neighborhoods to be able to determine what they want, as opposed to institutions and organizations with a lot of resources coming in and telling them what to do. So that's what the Lynchburg Rising is about. It's about rising and meeting the needs and taking up power and responding to the challenges as they arise.
That sounds like an effort that many communities around the state should emulate. And I look forward to hearing more. We've been joined by Latrice Aird. So I'd like to introduce her and allow her to kind of give some brief introductory remarks, 2 to 3 minutes. Ms. Aird is a former delegate and a Senate candidate in the state of Virginia. She is the daughter of a teenage mother and a young naval torpedoman. She grew up experiencing firsthand every harsh reality of income inequality and the deprivation of living in impoverished communities. But she has also witnessed her parents working multiple jobs while pursuing their education, no matter how long it took. And they instilled in her a strong work ethic and encouraged her to persevere. And that's evident in every facet of her life today. Lessons learned through that childhood adverse experience have informed her legislative priorities while she's serving as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. Over her 3 terms in the House of Delegates, Ms. Aird has earned a reputation as being courageous and indefatigable. A champion for social, racial, economic, and environmental justice issues. So if you'd like to make some introductory remarks, we'd love to hear them.
Yes, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and good morning to everyone on the panel. As stated, I am LaSharice Aird, and it is a privilege to join you all. When I was asked to participate on the panel, I primarily wanted to do so because I've had the opportunity to, I think, be active in Virginia during a period of time where there was not a lot of conversation centered around environmental justice. It wasn't even a popular term at that time when I first began government. And in particular, be able to see the progress that we've made and be part of it. And now seeing efforts to undo some of that progress. When I served in the Virginia House of Delegates, I represented 5 communities, both rural as well as urban. And no matter where you were in those communities, there was evidence of serious environmental needs. And you also saw a heavy energy burden experienced by many of the families in those communities. And so we'll talk about some of my legislation, I think, probably here soon. But I'm proud to find my way to caring about environmental justice really as a result of a landfill that was present in my community, and not understanding initially how that was impacting the air, the water, the experience that children were encountering nearby to that landfill. And that's how I began to really see how corporate entities could take advantage of Black and Brown communities in one location, but not in others. And so the short version really is that that experience really opened my eyes to a lot of the environmental injustices that were occurring throughout Virginia, and which led to the fruition of some of my legislation that I introduced during my period in office. And so again, it's a privilege to join you all, and I look forward to joining the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ayers, and I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly. So the next question will be for Michelle Williams. Ms. Williams, your work with youth, and especially with youth who have special needs, leads to this question. What do you think is important for young people to learn about environmental justice and the needs of their communities to combat environmental contamination? And how does special education kind of intersect with EJ?
Thank you for the question. This question is a loaded one, because as for myself being an expert in special education advocacy, we know that the needs of our children normally and are different from district to district. We cannot create a method and think that it's going to work for every child. So to further explain, it's many things that center the needs of children. First, we have to build programs around their needs and their communities. Then you have to also think about why you're creating these methods and programs that they can't be fishbowl centered. Children need many things. Children and families need many things. And you have to, one of the things within building, another thing in building a program is you have to be consistent through building that program. You have to have tangible, realistic outcomes for the progress of these children and the families to bring the community in a whole. Like Ms. Aird has stated, some Black and Brown children were negatively impacted in some areas and some were not. Well, we can't just take one area and build up while the other area suffers, because everything correlates together. What happens on one side of town is going to affect the other side of town, so on and so forth. So, and there has to be, again, tangible, realistic expectations. Also, with building a program, you also have to be careful not to overburden the children that are already heavily burdened in their communities with social issues that impact them. And that could be going on in the home. So you have to be able to identify the need of the child, determine the need of the community. Then you develop a plan to help the child thrive. Then include nature and other ways to connect the environment in a non-traditional therapeutic way, which kind of echoes the need from Ms. King, who has who has her development already going. It's like, this is the call to action from my end, but it has to go across the board. So, like, if you want to get a program to begin, you may want to look at grades 6 to 12, which should have environmental justice classes included in the curriculum so that other students can take to their future the knowledge and understanding. Then those individuals who have met certain phases of the program can then begin to work down to the younger generation to build them up, and move things around in their community and schools to benefit everyone. But one of our number one environmental injustices in all of this, we can plan, we can put out pilot programs, we could go into communities, but one of the number one environmental injustices is the insufficiency of the deplorable reading levels of our students. These levels have to be targeted and they have to be reversed, because if not, we'll just be going in a hamster wheel. So we have to begin there. Reading is fundamental across the board for every aspect.
You on mute.
Sorry about that. The next question is for Randy Welch. Randy, EJ is really about low wealth communities, and CERCAP serves and advocates for rural residents in North Carolina and Virginia. And the Virginia residents include those who are living in the Appalachia region. What are some of the biggest issues that rural communities face? And how does CERCAP help? How do you help communities, especially who are struggling with water and wastewater issues?
All right, thanks for that question. One of the biggest challenges that we see is the predominance of failing infrastructure. And the infrastructure can come from water, sewer, it could come from streets, it could come from buildings, anything leading around the community's infrastructure that they thrive and depend on a daily basis. Typically, when we go into a community and we're talking with them, we start to get the background history of why their infrastructure is failing. Right now, there's so much money being put into infrastructure that it's unprecedented. But when you work with communities of color or low income communities, one of the biggest challenges that we see that they are faced with is the non-trust of government. When we go in and talk with them, that's one of the very first things that they talk about is, well, we don't trust the government. We've been left behind by the government. We don't, that could come on a local level, state level, federal level, that the need has been there for years, but nobody would ever listen to them. I was in a community not too long ago and was talking to the mayor and was listening to all of the concerns that they had. You're talking, typically the communities we work with are less than 3,000 in population. So they're small rural communities out in the middle of a county that is just basically forgot about them. They're just there. They don't, but was talking to the mayor and listening to the issues that they have. over 80% of the residents in that community have got failing septic systems. With that failing septic system, you've got yards that are standing in human waste. Well, he's been trying to, for 20 years, to get the county to listen to him and say, hey, we want to put in a townwide sewer system. We want to clean up the community. Well, so, so he's been faced with challenges of that, but also even to the fact of the local school district. When you talk about a community of a little over 400 in population, that community is divided by a school district. The school district lines run straight down Main Street. Your cousin can live across the street from you on Main Street, and he is bused to a different school than you go to. Well, now that builds the trust of the community to say, we don't trust, we don't listen, we don't care to listen because they're going to divide us even more. So as I told the mayor and was listening to the stories, and one of the biggest things that I like to push for when I'm advocating for these communities, I informed the mayor, I said, if I build a stage and build the audience, do you promise me you'll get on the stage with me? I said, because your voice has got to be heard. I'm going to build the audience for you, and I'm going to build the stage for you, but I need you to get on there with me, and let's break down the barriers. Let's get these stories heard, and we'll get it down to somebody's ear where they'll listen to us. But, that's one community, for example, but I also got another community that we've worked with. Years ago, a larger city actually run water and sewer through this area. Well, this town come up and they wanted to be incorporated as their own community. Great. Everything went through. They were able to incorporate. They made a town. Everything was beautiful. Well, the larger community had a barrier put on them because they own the water and sewer lines coming through town. People were in town with failing well and septic systems, but were unable to tap into this municipal water system because they did not like the fact that they incorporated into their own community. It's basically how it boiled down to. So you've got people living in this community that do not have adequate water and wastewater and cannot grow their community because of the lack of infrastructure that they do not have and do not have the resources to tap onto. And was sitting in there, and there was this elderly lady sitting in the audience with me one day, and she just broke down in tears and started crying. And I was, her house had caught on fire. It was a small kitchen fire started out. There was a fire hydrant sitting in her front yard. The responding fire department could not connect to that fire hydrant because they did not own the fire hydrant, and her house burnt to the ground. Started with a small kitchen fire. So that's some of the things that we see and we advocate for, that we build these communities, but also build the wealth. Some of the things that we have done for the EJ piece of it and working with these communities, we have partnered with Spring Point and have done several video sessions that these communities can actually get in and listen to and help them build resiliency in themselves and to help build them up and build them for a stronger future. So, we've got some of that issues. And then, just working with these communities, some success stories we've had. We just recently, we're in the process of finishing up a $6 million water line extension for a community. Residents their wells, come to find out, were contaminated with fecal coliform bacteria. They could not drink the water. They were spending $10,000 to $15,000 on home filter systems just so they could have adequate water. Well, we were able to work with this community and advocate for them that we got water lines extended. It was even to the point there was a local church that's the hub of a community that they could not even have functions at their church because of not having water. And the water that was there was such in poor quality, everybody was having to bring bottled water or this lady that lived next door allowed the congregation to go to her house just to use the restroom and come back. So, that's some of the things that we're faced with, and some of the things that we work on and we advocate for is building the community back up, but also building the trust up, that they start to trust and see that there is things that can happen for you. And collaborating with groups like this is just phenomenal, that we can throw multiple resources into them that will help build that trust and build that knowledge and build that wealth base back into that community to make them a thriving community again.
Well, that's I appreciate your sharing those stories with us, and it really kind of helps us to feel like we understand really what's going on in some of these rural communities and some of the stark issues that they're facing. Ms. Aird, I want to address the next question to you. You championed a bill in the state legislature to declare racism in Virginia as a public health emergency. Why was that important to do? And has it resulted in any impact in places like Petersburg, which is recognized as one of the least healthy communities in the state? And how has your advocacy for health equity been? What has resulted from it? What more needs to be done?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Before I jump into that, I can't help but to thank Randy for some of his comments. One of the other resolutions that I championed in the House was declaring access to water and human rights. And that is because we saw a lot of families during the pandemic without access to water. And what was the number one thing you were telling anybody and everybody to do? Wash your hands, use a lot of water to combat the pandemic. And so just thank you for that work, and definitely a mantle I'm hoping to pick back up if I'm fortunate to return to the General Assembly. Before talking about the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I just want to sort of set the tone of where we were. This legislation was introduced in 2021, which we were, number one, actively within the pandemic. Number two, in a state of social unrest, both in the Commonwealth and around the country. Just because of the rioting and the protesting over in racial divide, if you will, that we were seeing in real time. And particularly in Virginia, we were coming out of, having, not to make it too political, but a trifecta, basically the transition from being a General Assembly with Republicans in power for more than 2 decades to now Democrats being in power at all levels of government. And it was important to me that and I wanted to make sure as a Commonwealth, we took that time and that moment to try and do what was necessary to right the wrongs of Virginia's long history, but to also acknowledge, right? Because you cannot head in another direction to right wrongs if you don't acknowledge what has been done. And so this resolution, which is House Joint Resolution 537, you can find it online. The opening of it really just starts by saying we acknowledge as a Commonwealth that ultimately Virginia is ground zero for a lot of the racism that is embedded in our systems and our structures and has been spread throughout our country. Because if you know your history, you know it all started in our Commonwealth. And so this resolution was, number one, to acknowledge the existence, but number two, to educate. A lot of what we have been talking about today, believers and non-believers in climate change, individuals who recognize the impacts that are occurring in Black and Brown communities versus other communities, there's oftentimes a difference in perspective. And the reason why this resolution was so critical is because in the heart of all of this social unrest, there was a battle between being racist and acknowledging the existence of racism. And the one thing that I don't want to be for debate as we are trying to further policy goals in the Commonwealth is a lack of understanding that it is a fact, 110%, that racism exists in our systems and our structures. And so I spent a lot of time educating the General Assembly, the leaders of that body, about the difference between racism and the difference between being racist. And that conversation is not just important for the leadership, but also as a society, because what I found during this process is that the leaders are reflecting the push they are feeling and receiving from those they represent. And so as long as you have constituents that are saying to their leaders, I do not believe in this policy, you can't get that representative to change course or to take a different action. So to speak specifically to what's in the resolution, basically it requires that your local, regional, and state entities also recognize that racism is a public health crisis. It also requires, and at this time, there was a commission in Virginia titled the Commission to Examine Racial Inequity in Virginia Law, to offer recommendations back to the General Assembly. It also required training for elected officials, staff members, and state employees to recognize and combat implicit bias. It adopts a glossary of terms and definitions so that we are all operating from the same playing field as it pertains to what these words mean, so that we're speaking the same language. And then it also goes further to say, we commit to promoting community engagement actively among Virginia's citizens on issues of racism. So that's a lot of words and a lot of language, but ultimately this was always intended only to be step one. After this resolution, the goal was to utilize Virginia's state agencies, particularly the Virginia Department of Health, the Virginia Department of Education, all of these state agencies, to then say, how do you, within the area that you control, try to unravel some of this embedded inequity that's within your systems. It's a mammoth task, but you have to start somewhere, and you have to have these open and honest conversations. And that is to include from the environmental justice lens. And so I do believe at this time, when the resolution was passed, it was impactful in, number one, coming to terms with Virginia's history and allowing government to take a front seat to leading, making action within the state. But by no means do I think our work is done. Since this resolution passed, the hands of power did change in the General Assembly, where you no longer have this trifecta. You now have a mixed government, some with Democrats in power in the Senate, Republicans in power in the House, and a Republican gubernatorial administration. And that is why you now see the rolling back of some of these efforts. And so for me, I believe that the next step is to try and add accountability mechanisms to the concepts that are laid out in the resolution, and in particular, also investments, so that these agencies have the resources to do this work. And so, yes, we've made great progress, but no, our work is not done on this front.
It's wonderful to hear about that fight, and I hope that the fight continues. At this point, I think I'd like to kind of throw out some general questions, and whoever would like to respond to them, chime in. So some of you have talked about, the impact on air quality in some of the communities that we're focusing on in our discussion today. So, communities of color, low-income communities, communities that feel that they are not represented, and that no one's really looking out for their best interest. And some of those contributors to poor air quality have been facilities. So it could be coal storage that might be happening in a community, or it could be a landfill. So I'm wondering if we could kind of hear a little more about what's happening in certain sections of the state, that are, facilities that are exposing people to contaminants in the air that are really having an adverse impact on their health, causing them to suffer from conditions like asthma, and that are really hurting people who may have chronic health conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or other conditions.
Dr. Phoenix, you said, what are they or what are we doing?
Well, what are they? Where are they? And what are we doing?
Okay. I think all of us stated that there, depending on where you are, there can be a myriad of things going on in your communities. I think air quality is a major issue across the state. And I think water, lead, contamination is also another major issue. And then we have some areas such as Newport News, Norfolk, that are inundated with flooding. So sea level rise is an issue around our coastal communities. Health is a major issue. As I stated, I have 4 children. All of them have upper respiratory, diseases. And so when we talk about Medicaid and even rollbacks on having access to health care, when you have children or even yourself that are, have these diseases, the medication is extremely expensive. Like it is beyond, even if you are working full time and have, getting paid a living wage, you cannot afford the medication. It's just not, it's not going to be a choice of housing and medication. You cannot afford these medications, period, flat out. And my son gets a Xolair shot. Those shots are he gets two, $15,000 a shot. It's absolutely ridiculous. He would not get it. He's on 8 other different medications on top of that, plus 3 allergy shots twice a week. It is as Ms. Ayer said, it is a public health crisis when you're talking about in terms of racism. And there is a term, environmental racism, and that is what that is. And when people can't afford, medication due to the deliberate contamination of our communities, it's just, being on my criminal justice side of this is like, why aren't more corporations being punished punitively for this? Our communities are extremely vulnerable and rendered helpless in terms of fighting, these corporations, permitting and things like, we don't even understand how to push back on a permit. And so it is ever more important that, through these investments that are coming down, the money that's coming down from the Inflation Act and other federal funding, that when the state gets these funds, that money trickles down to organizations that are in communities that can relay this information in a way that it can be understood. As Ms. King said, this information is extremely technical and academic in nature. And when like with DEQ, when you want to respond to a permanent, they require that it be technical in nature when you respond. That immediately continues to exclude people who are not technical and just want to say, I don't want this in my community. And that should be enough alone. No, in other instances, no means no. Why does it not when we are saying no? In our communities, we don't want a compressor station. We don't want a landfill. Petersburg, with the landfill in Petersburg, there has been an uptick in cancer in these communities. We don't want another cancer alley here. We don't want a cancer alley anywhere. But communities that don't know, organizations that are not getting the funding, not being able to hire people of color to be able to also learn this information and to go out into their own communities to disseminate this information where people can understand it and respond and organize and create community political power, we're going to end up with the same, because it's not going to be enough just our organizations. It is going to take all of us.
Mhm.
So you've mentioned one barrier, which is the ability of people, to understand perhaps some of the technical language that surrounds, these facilities and the chemicals that they might be dumping into the environment. I have heard many times that an additional barrier is lack of notice. And that people don't hear about the plans to put something into their community until it's really too late to mount an effective response. Is that something that any of you have experienced? Does that ring true to you as well? And if so, could you give me perhaps an example?
Um,
I was just going to
Ms.
jump
Williams,
in.
Ms.
And-
Williams, and then Ms. Ayer.
Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
as far as contamination, we know that schools and community soil and water is tested. Yet that information is not provided to the community until it's basically too late. Until it needs to be on the news. It needs to be immediate, remediation. Individuals need the same way they set up after a storm to fix a power line. The same way individuals in organizations or in status of power and resources need to set up to provide for the communities. If a power company can sit out from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night working to get the power restored, that's how it needs to be set up when there's a contamination in the water system within these schools. Right here in my home, why is my cold water warm? Because the ground is too hot, which leads to what? More increase of what? Bacteria. But nobody is talking about it. Nobody's saying anything about it. And then when the children are consuming this water, because there's only so much boiling of the water you can do. When the children are consuming this, either by drinking or by bathing in it, then you have what? Increased eczema, and could be potentially failing their organs. But we don't want to talk about that. And individuals who are in place to make sure that the word gets out to the public say nothing until it's a pandemic. It's an outcry. And the kids going to school, they're not able to think. Contamination of water and soil is the same thing that happens when it's an increased contamination of lead, of a child digesting lead or being around lead, but they don't want to talk about it. So it has to be more transparency and immediate transparency in order for individuals who are like us on this panel to be able to come to the table to help these people with a solution. So transparency is the biggest issue.
Ms. Aird, you had a comment to make.
Yeah, I was just gonna refer back to the example I referenced regarding the landfill in Petersburg. I have to admit that when parents were smelling toxins in the air, there was nothing that energized them more because their babies were breathing in this air. Sometimes when they were at recess, they were breathing in this air. And I saw families get active really quickly. They were fed up. They were no longer tolerating. Unfortunately, I would say once you're smelling it in the air, it's a bad situation already, right? Especially over a prolonged period of time. But they began writing letters. They began emailing DEQ, VDH, all of these agencies to say something isn't right about this. You're telling me it's fine, but it's not. And I remember hosting a town hall about this, and it was standing room only. And so there are instances where community will come together and say, we will not tolerate this anymore. And right now, there is the Virginia Reliability Project that is occurring coming right through Petersburg. And this stands to also further add toxins and pollution to our air if approved and move forward. And there is an effort to organize. But what I will say is that organizing has to look and feel different in our communities, right? In the same way we go to churches to communicate any message that we want people to get really quickly, you got to do the same thing when it comes to somebody trying to bring a project in your community. You have to go to where they are, and we can't expect them to stop their day-to-day just trying to make it to come and explore something that's not typically an everyday concern because you can't see it, right? And so I think as we talk about how to combat some of these challenges, particularly in Black and Brown communities, we've got to prioritize coalition building, not just with environmental organizations, not just with organizations already attuned to this type of challenge, but to your PTA, but to your Divine Nine, but to your all of these groups that this isn't necessarily on their radar, but they have people power to get the word out and to get a movement going. And so I think that as I'm seeing the work occurring around the Virginia Reliability Project in particular, the one thing I noticed is there are other people coming from outside of this community into this community to try and wave the red flag. And that's important and it's appreciated. But then you have a trust barrier because I don't know you. I don't know your organization. I don't know your work. And so you're coming to tell me that something is wrong. But if I don't know you, I'm less likely to receive what you are trying to flag for me. So you got to not only have the cooperation of organizations that care about this, but you have to build community, to build coalition within that place so that there is a trust there and a willingness to get in the mix of what you're trying to prevent from occurring. And those are my comments.
And I would like to echo off of that. And like you said, the first thing when you go into a community as an outsider going in, you've got to gain trust. Irregardless of what you do, you've got to gain trust. And for them people to put their trust into you because of the failed trust that they've had in the past. But as we advance communities forward, the communities and the local leaders have got to get out of the mentality of it's not in my backyard, I'm not worrying about it. We've got to stop and think about what's the best for the community in whole, not just my backyard. So, I mean, it's story listening to one time before, county allowed a asphalt plant to come and build in the county. Well, they put it right beside of a little crossroads in the county that was a lot of people of color living in. Well, this lady, elderly lady, did not want to sell her house and did not want to give it up. So they built the landfill back behind her. I mean, the asphalt plant back behind her house. Now she has become a prisoner of her home because with her asthma, she can't go outside. Well, it's that mentality of, well, it's not in my backyard. Why do I need to worry about it? I don't need to worry about it. We've got to come out of that stigma. And that's where we come in to build this trust to say, hey, look, let us help advocate for that. Let us help push that. We got to keep making that move. When COVID hit, we had a community that we were already working with, but we had people living in the community that were driving 25 minutes to a doctor's appointment. And a lot of the elderly did not have transportation, so they were relying on what a friend or family, because there was no public transportation for them. So we started advocating, and we wound up the town hall in this community allowed the local hospital to come in and set up a clinic that they're there 3 days a week, and the people in the community are able to go in now instead of having to travel out for basic health care that we should all have the rights to. We should all have that access to.
Well, I want to thank all of the panelists for really making a great contribution to this conversation. We have a few minutes left, so I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to make just a brief closing remarks before we close it out at 11:45. So just, would anyone like to say anything in closing?
Sure, I'll say something since haven't said anything in a while. So I just want to thank you for this panel, for having the opportunity to be a part of such a rich conversation. But I think for me, thinking about the work, but then thinking about my life individually, and there is a sense of urgency here with these issues. We are talking about it abstractly, and and sometimes I go through this existential dread of where we are with climate and environmental, but then the work gives me hope. And so I think that it is in the work, and it really is, in my mind, in the building of community to um, push for changes around these issues is central and important. That we create infrastructure with people and communities to be able to advocate. Because a lot of the asking around certain data we don't have. Like, we know, generally speaking, that um, there are certain communities that have more asthma because of hazardous conditions, but we may not necessarily have that information until something happens that pushes us. Someone gets sick, there's the smell. And even then, those communities have been dealing with those issues for quite some time until something happens where they're saying enough is enough, right? And so I think we are at the point where enough is enough, and we have to continue to work, from an institutional perspective, but then just individually in the communities that we are in. How are we going to survive and make it through these things? Because it's so much to unpack with climate, with environment, and building community so that we can have a healthy future. So I am hopeful. Um, Hearing the work and hearing about what everyone else has done, and continuing the fight um, for a livable future and present.
And I just want to add very quickly that it is not enough just to include. We hear a lot about inclusion. We must seek to understand those that we are including, a lot of differences. And, people are coming from different backgrounds and experiences. And we, may not understand that. So it causes, some type of conflict. And so inclusion is not enough. We must strive to understand folks, take the time to listen and hear and appreciate, because we need everybody, all hands on deck. We can't afford to lose anyone in this fight. I'm not saying everybody got to like each other, but we do have to love one another, and that is a commandment, and that will be the driving force that keeps us together to continue to combat evil. And that's what this is. This is evil.
Well, those are great last words. I think they're going to have to be our last words because we're a little bit over time. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot. Thanks to all of you. And I really appreciate your being on the panel. I think it was great. And I know I personally will be following up with each one of you. Great, great, great discussion today. Thanks very much. And we'll close it out.
All right. Is that it?